Right here on In Focus, some observers and public representatives are calling for East African Police Service to fall under control of the provinces they operate in. This follows marked declines in allocation of police officers to police stations in the Western Cape. The province is battling intense gang wars, mass shootings and a rise in murders and attempted murders alongside other contact crimes. Officials say 71% of the Western Cape's 151 police stations have seen a decrease in the number of officers allocated to them during the past 5 years. Joining us now to evaluate whether the federalized system of policing would be a good alternative on our provincial Minister of Police Oversight and Community Safety in the Western Cape, Reagen, as well as the spokesperson for civil rights organization Action Society, Ian Cameron. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. One of the historic demands of the Western Cape is the devolution of the police control to province. I'll give you the first bite at it, MEC, because, of course, the first answer from the minister is political. So let's deal with the political first. He says this call has got racial undertones to serve a particular race. A single police service as envisaged by the Western Cape is not catered for in our constitution. What do you say?
But there is room for us to make amendments in terms of what needs to happen at national government, at national parliament, because we firmly believe that some provinces would be capable of producing a capable and professional police service. Tabu, in your intro remarks, you've made mention of the 71% of SAPS stations for the last 5 years that saw a decrease. But underlining that, we also have a 10% vacancy rate in the current budgeted amount for what we call the granted establishment. So we are not even meeting what we currently need in the budget that is allocated for, but already in an under-resourced environment. And sadly, I visited an area called Umfuleni, which is covering a large part of the Umfuleni area together with drift sands and 2 informal settlements as well. And that particular station portrayed a 0% vacancy rate. However, when I visited early April, I discovered that there was actually a 14% vacancy rate at that particular station. So we do know that under-resourcing has been, year on year, we've been complaining, nagging, motivating to say why it is needed, because in the province, we also have a legislated process called the Policing Needs and Priorities. And that is, in terms of the Constitution, where we make those recommendations to the South African Police Service, and sadly, it has not been taken into account. In 2020, I just want to end off with this, in 2020, we saw a budget cut in order to bail out a failed state-owned entity like SAA by almost 11 billion rand. And some of those monies came from education, from justice, from the NPA, and from the South African Police Service. So we've seen how there has been a systematic decrease in the amount of SAPS members that we have here. We've discussed about the dockets that SAPS members has, 200 dockets per detective, and then 71% of our detectives did not even complete the basic detective training course. So there is a professional aspect that we are speaking about. We are speaking about the under-resourcing, the under-training, but more importantly, how a province can produce a capable and dedicated police service, because we have many officers within our province that are doing an amazing job, and they're putting their lives on the lines in order to make sure that we are safe, but they are doing the jobs of 3, 4, or 5 people. So it's definitely something that we have highlighted over a number of years, and will continue to do so, because we do believe that there is room and scope for the province to actually take control of the South African Police Service and not be managed all the way from Pretoria and making decisions that affect the Western Cape directly.
I'm going to come back to some of those issues that you're raising there, MEC. Let's bring you in, Ian. You have weighed in on this in a number of articles, but one of the issues, of course, that you're saying is decentralization will restore accountability, will improve service delivery. A more stronger statement, you're saying decentralizing and ring-fencing good governance is the only way to save us from failed national government. The minister argues the opposite. In fact, he says centralized command, combined resources, work at tandem, and chase criminals all over the four corners of the country, because criminals know no bounds, no boundaries, no provinces.
Yes, well, I think it's quite simple. If anything that Bheki Cele has said thus far had actually worked, we would have seen a decrease in murder, we would have seen a decrease in rape, yet we still see 60 people being murdered every single day in the country. Tomorrow, another 60 people will be murdered. Tomorrow, another 153 women will be raped in South Africa. And remember, as I always say, only 1 in 9 rapes in South Africa are actually reported. Our conviction rate is still below 5%, and so the list goes on. Centralizing power seems to be a task of a liberation movement. It seems to be an activist type of thing to do by Bheki Cele. It's a way to use the South African Police Service as an iron fist for the ruling national political party, which is the ANC. And I'm sorry, I might seem too outspoken about it, but I don't see Bheki Cele bearing the brunt with the under-resourced cops on the ground, because I know of many good men and women in blue in South Africa, whether they wear the uniform of SAPS, a provincial police department, or even local government policing departments. It's atrocious to always see Cele showing up only to have so-called community imbizos, but we don't see any solutions on the ground. He disbanded most of the anti-gang unit. When I spend time, and I can vouch for the MEC as well, spending time with many of these communities, walking patrols with elderly ladies that try and keep their community safe, I don't see Cele doing the same thing. Instead, he increases the VIP protection budget. So he is the last person that can speak about successful policing strategy. He has no real background in it either. I've never seen one of his so-called strategies being implemented successfully. The DNA bill, still not sorted out. The Convicted Offender Amendment Bill, still not sorted out. And so the list goes on. So Bheki Cele, he needs to lay off. And I really think this is an opportunity we should take on. The last thing I want to mention, when things get really rough in most of these areas, it is always provincial policing and metro police or local traffic police that are there first. And in the majority of cases, SAPS members are under-resourced, and when they do try, they often have to ask for resources from the local government and provincial policing bodies.
MEC, let's take that question of under-resourcing. In fact, the minister, one would say, in his response in the debate in Parliament recently, was taking aim at your province in particular, saying he knows of certain individuals who are, lack of a better word, who are deliberately diverting budgets to fund private securities in their province. So saying the question of under-resourcing of police stations and the police in the province is because you have diverted those funds, those budgets to fund your private police force.
Definitely not. The way it works is that we have South African Police Service that is a national competency, and that budget comes all the way from national. What we have seen we do here is to add extra boots on the ground to compensate for where SAPS are not delivering. So in terms of the Western Cape Safety Plan, which is a two-pronged approach, where we look at violence prevention and the root causes of crime, but also looking at adding extra boots on the ground, because we do know visibility. SAPS even say themselves that visibility is a deterrent to crime. But when there's no SAPS, when there's no vans available, we know it's extremely difficult for the good men that is in SAPS to do their jobs. So I can guarantee that what he's saying is purely political. I've been to some of these imbizos, and we hear wild accusations that we know is resonating within communities about corruption, lack of resources, not answering the phones from the South African Police Service. And our aim is not at the men and women in blue on the ground, but it's directed to the National Minister of Police that should actually be doing his job, because what we have also seen is how we are able to foster valuable relationships between neighborhood watches, CPFs, the LEAP officers, which is coming from the Western Cape government, where we have spent money that is outside of our mandate, because SAPS is a national competency, because we understand that this issue is urgent and we need to make the necessary budgetary allocations to make it happen. Yeah. But it's definitely not the case. And I just want to end off with this. It's very interesting, and I'm going to count my words very carefully. I was in the NCOP, Thabo, and in the NCOP in February, the Deputy Minister says to a remark that I've made. I made a remark and I said a number of things, and then I said, just because nationally saying that we are the most resourced in terms of SAPS, it doesn't mean it's the truth. He then committed in February of this year to provide me with a report where he's going to showcase that we are the most resourced. Up until today, despite follow-ups, we've not received this report. The minister last year at an Imbizo told me he's going to invite me to an oversight to go with him. Despite follow-ups, he has still not invited me. So there's a whole lot of politics in play. And if I must choose between winning a vote or helping someone and restoring their life, saving their life, I will always lean this side. I never want to play politics. But there is stuff we must say, Thabo. We must say that the men and women in blue are struggling on the ground by doing the job of 3 or 4 more people, despite the other issues in terms of DNA, vehicles, training, which is all adding an extra burden.
Yeah. Ian, why is the principle of operational independence important to proper functioning of police?
Well, I think it's a completely failed state organ at the moment. SAPS is in complete disarray. I think it's in dire straits. I don't know how to describe the SAPS crisis more accurately. There's a shortage of people. We've got this incredibly, let's call it, fat command structure. We've got way too many generals, brigadiers, officers, and we've got far too little experienced people working the streets. And those working the streets are about to leave on pension. So we need to reconsider the way we approach policing in South Africa. And I don't think many people understand how serious the crisis is. Remember that many of our experienced station commanders across the country, not only in the Western Cape, are all within 3 to 5 years from retirement. Within that time, I can tell you as a fact that there aren't competent people to take up those positions because we don't have the experience, we don't have the years of knowledge, and we don't have the right level of training. So it is crucial that we approach this differently. And I think another part that's very important, and I want to lean in on the race comment by Becky Tsele. The places that I've been where the violence is absolutely rife are in places where the majority of people living there are either black or colored. So why would he suddenly now call it a race issue? Because those are the places where the majority of these additional law enforcement units have been deployed. And those are the places where we don't see SAPS doing foot patrols, doing the brave work that they should be doing. And it's not to criticize the members on the ground. I understand the frustration within which they work. But he's playing politics, and he's playing it for a provincial political battle instead of trying to see how he can save lives.
Right. We talk more on the oversight of the police at provincial level and what that means when we continue next. Stay with us. Back tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405, devolution of the police service. Great implications it has indeed, and what will it really mean in our context locally, economically, but also where does the responsibility lie then as far as operation, administrative, regulatory powers, and so on and so forth. Let's hear from the MEC. MEC, what powers do you want devolved to province? Administration, operational, regulatory powers? Is it okay to expect the MEC to be held accountable to the conduct of the police, but also to the performance of the police?
No, most definitely. I think that is the ultimate goal. Because once we see the entire establishment of SAPS is under a capable provincial government, I firmly believe that we will be able to see change in that regard. Because what we have done here in the Western Cape is extend the mandate of our oversight. So in terms of policing oversight and community safety, is to make sure that we put measures in place to ensure that SAPS ultimately become better operational, but also make better use of their resources. For example, it's very weird taboo, and this makes me angry to a certain extent, that we have highlighted skewed allocations, where we've seen that in Khayelitsha, there would be a population to police ratio of 1 officer to almost 1,000 members in Khayelitsha. In Mitchell's Plain, it will be 100, it will be 1 person to 600 people. But then we come to Camps Bay, which is under the command of the South African Police Service, where the ratio will be 1 officer for every 250 residents. So we've seen in various precincts these skewed allocations. Hence why we have even instituted and put money aside to establish the Office of the Western Cape Police Ombudsman to look at service delivery matters concerning the South African Police Service. And if I look at the work that amazing organizations like Action Society is doing, even with the court watching briefs, and what we are doing in terms of the court watching briefs is to monitor court cases that are postponed month on month, some rape cases, some murder cases, and drug-related cases, and that cases are postponed every month. I read a document on a report on the court watching brief a couple of months ago, and one particular rape case was struck off the court roll after it being postponed for 11 times, which led to secondary victimization for that particular victim in that case, and which shows that we are wanting to extend our oversight. We are wanting to make sure that SAPS become a capable organization, but also make sure that they are professionalized. So if the province is able to manage that entire process, and we will be able to see effect and to be held accountable, essentially, because we do want to be held accountable to the voters. I think that is for every government, that is first and foremost. But if we are wanting to play that role in the interest of residents that are calling for this. There's organizations, there's residents that are saying, why can't the Western Cape government control the South African Police Service?
Right. One might argue that maybe it will work in the Western Cape because you seem to have a handle on what is going on there. But what sort of security challenges do we have in the country that would be addressed by a decentralized police force, right? So would what is working in the Western Cape work in Limpopo? Would what's working in the Western Cape work in Mpumalanga? And what would then be the institutional framework that we would need to put in place to be able to be coordinated in all these provinces and the various forces that are working?
Tabo, we are at a place now where Ian mentioned earlier on, stuff that the national minister has committed to, he never delivered. We've seen how SAPS fail in certain regards. And I firmly believe that we need to be innovative. We need to be innovative in our approach. We need to be thinking ahead. So yes, we are calling for it here in the Western Cape, and it might not work in Mpumalanga. It might not work in the Northern Cape, for example. But if we are able to be innovative in our approach to see how the Western Cape is able to take control of the South African Police Service, work alongside those dedicated men and women, try to root out corruption, try to root out the mismanagement within the South African Police Service, which is, again, not only affecting citizens on the ground, but it's affecting the good men and women in the SAPS as well. So it might not work in each and every province, but we are in a state now where a whole lot of stuff has been tried. We are able to be innovative in our approach as well and put those regulatory frameworks in place in order for us to see how a province like the Western Cape, which has showed over a number of years on each and every metric that we outperform other provinces, we outperform other municipalities, even where we are in government as a political party. But to take the politics even out of it, the Western Cape, like I've said, on every metric, we're normally on top. And it's now a state where it's to be, how can we measure ourselves against other regions across the world to see how can we measure up in that regard. So it's not just about beating the ANC. It's not just about wanting to play politics, because that's already been done and dusted. But we want to measure ourselves against world-class cities, regions, in order to see how we can take this beautiful province forward, that will ultimately better South Africa as a whole. Because the Western Cape is a beautiful place. We have beautiful people, and we believe that those people are deserving to be safe and free and secure within the environments where they live and work. Because where we still see, and the area where I'm from in Mitchell's Plain, all too often taboo. Our people feel helpless. Our people feel disadvantaged to a large extent because they are unable to live a life that they would want to, regarding the safety issues that we have.
Yeah. Well, how will, Ian, a devolved law enforcement force look like in the context of our economic circumstances in particular, which we'll have to consider as well? What is a workable formula there? What is the scope of authority that you give to provinces? How will the different security or police forces be coordinated so that they complement each other? And what are the institutional arrangements that will be needed to coordinate that broader devolved security policing force, rather?
Well, I think there are 2 or 3 aspects you need to take into consideration, Thabo. I think one of the first ones is to make sure that financial resources don't go to national treasury first. They must stay in that specific province. That's crucial because the mismanagement of finances on a national level is so serious and such a serious threat to criminal justice in South Africa that we need to make sure that finances are managed properly. I think after that, it's crucial that there is a synergy that is built and obviously a very accurate role description of the different law enforcement entities you would then have in the province, whether it's provincial law enforcement or traffic rather, local government law enforcement, etc., and obviously SAPS. But I think in general, it's crucial that there is let's call it the majority of the control is performed by the province, specifically the Premier, and obviously there would be a lot of influence from the MEC's office. I think if we can build something of that kind, we will see a major improvement. On top of that, I think one needs to, in the same breath, speak about the prosecution authority and the role of municipal courts. If we're not going to improve and increase the mandate and the role of municipal courts, like, for example, with something like abalone poaching or drug and gang-related activities, then I don't think the long-lasting effect will be as good as it can possibly be. So it's crucial that prosecution and policing is approached as a collective, and once that is streamlined, you can run the correctional process parallel to that as well. Then you've got the majority of the full circle. You can talk about crime prevention, reaction, prosecution, and rehabilitation all in one breath. But in the end, we need, I would say, full provincial control.
Yeah. Ian, maybe some will have a particular challenge, particularly with that treasury issue, right? And say, what mechanisms of transparency and accountability then will be created as far as budgets and money is concerned? And because currently you've got treasury that is able to, I suppose, hold people accountable as far as the PFMA is concerned and so forth.
Yes, it should be that way, but it's not happening. I want to use an example with a case that I worked a few years ago in Northwest. A place like Hartbeespoort Dam in the Northwest province pays over 70% of tax and only about 6% of tax returns to that area. Now, with that, it's a very important comment because remember, a lot of people can't afford to pay tax, so one needs to take that into consideration. But that being said, a province like the Western Cape is now busy subsidizing other provinces that are being mismanaged by corrupt government officials. So on a larger scale, it's crucial that money stays here, because obviously Treasury is not doing a good enough job to make sure that finances are spent properly. Bheki Cele himself has been implicated in corruption before, and now he's the Minister of Police. So I think it's of crucial importance that we keep it within a province. If that province doesn't do it properly, then obviously one needs to build in the necessary mechanisms to manage it the right way. But currently, the Western Cape is far better managed than any province in the rest of the country. And I think if it can be innovative enough, it could really be a bit of a trendsetter as to how law enforcement can work in the rest of South Africa.
MEC Reagen, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. And Ian Cameron, much appreciated. Thanks for coming on tonight. That's the Provincial Minister of Police Oversight and Community Safety in the Western Cape, Reagen Allen, and the spokesperson of the civil rights organization Action Society, Ian Cameron.